The Cimmerians have no rulers. You're a barbarian. You live free in the world. You owe allegiance to no one. Is that not so?
It is, and it always will be.
Between the years when the oceans drank Atlantis and the rise of the sons of Ares, there was an age undreamed of, when shining kingdoms lay spread across the world. Hither came Conan, the Cimmerian, sword in hand. It is I, his chronicler, who knows well his saga. Now let me tell you of the days of high adventure.
What do you want me to do for you?
It is written in the scrolls of Skelos that a woman child born with a certain mark must make a perilous journey. My niece, Jenna, has such a mark. I want you to take her on that journey. There is a key she must find. A key only she can touch.
Where is it?
In a castle
Guarded.
by a wizard called Toth Amon.
A wizard?
It frightens you. You're afraid of magic.
Come bring her, Conan.
I swear that if Conan will let me ride with him, I will give my life for him.
All our destinies are at hand. Even Conan's. He doesn't yet know it.
We don't need him, my queen.
I don't need the captain of the guard to steal a key. That is a task for a thief. What I do need you for is to see that this dear child is returned safely to the palace. Both the treasure and the virginity intact.
I will protect them both.
You know the legend written on the wall of the crypt.
The day of my birth.
Then you know what will happen if the horn is placed back in the forehead of Davith.
The god will live again, and we who give him life will stand by his right hand and rule the world with him.
Give us the girl or we'll take her.
Enough talk!
In the summer of 1984, Conan returned to the big screen in Conan the Destroyer, arriving in the United States on the 29th of June and in the UK on the 19th of August. Directed by industry veteran Richard Fleischer, the movie was produced on a modest budget of $18 million and it made over $100 million worldwide, making it a huge success. But unfortunately it was given mixed reviews on release and left many fans of the original 1982 film disappointed. Many cited the change of tone and push towards a more family-friendly approach as the wrong direction. But on the plus side, some critics felt it was an entertaining sword and sorcery film that felt faithful to the Marvel comics. Marvel did produce a tie-in comic that spanned 2 issues, and a novelization was written by Robert Jordan, who had already produced 5 other books on Conan. A sequel was always on the cards. The success of the original movie pretty much confirmed that. Arnold Schwarzenegger was signed to a 10-year contract with Dino De Laurentiis, and the general plan was to produce a Conan sequel every 2 years. Edward Pressman, who produced the first movie, apparently didn't receive any money from the box office takings, and decided to sell his rights to Conan to Dino De Laurentiis for over $4 million, and a 10% share of the profits for any sequel. Pressman would later say he made more money selling out by not making a movie. Dino passed on the producing role to his daughter Raffaella, and she got the ball rolling on getting the sequel started. Edward Pressman reduced his role to an executive position. Pressman was owed money from Dino for the expenses he paid out on the first movie, but Dino didn't write out the check to Edward, but instead the story consultant on the first movie, Roy Thomas. Roy worked for Marvel and had written the majority of the Conan comics throughout the 70s. Roy was happy to help Edward get his money transferred, and Edward quizzed Roy on what he was doing for work. Roy and his writing partner Jerry Conway had just written the script for the animated movie Fire and Ice. Pressman suggested they should write the Conan sequel. At that point, Australian filmmaker Roger Donaldson was the director of Conan 2, due to John Milius, the director of the first movie, being unavailable. Roy and Jerry were happy to develop the story, and as they went through many drafts to please the producers, Richard Fleischer then jumped on board as director. I'm not sure why Richard replaced Roger. Dino was also producing The Bounty, and Roger moved on to that movie, so I presume Roger felt The Bounty was something he wanted to tackle instead of a Conan sequel. Jerry and Roy wanted to throw in more elements from the comics. They felt the first movie didn't have much connection with the comic strip, so they brought in characters from the Marvel series and took ideas from some of the stories to create the sequel. They wrote an action scene where Conan battles a giant spider, but during the production meetings they discovered the movie Krull had a similar sequence, so that idea had to be dropped. The ending was supposed to have Conan fight this giant demon, very much like the devil, but the idea was too expensive and things had to be scaled down, which resulted in many drafts of the script as they had to constantly fight to keep the budget down. Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway at the end weren't happy with the final script. Stanley Mann, who worked on The Eye of the Needle and Omen 2, adapted their story, so Roy and Jerry decided later on to translate their original unaltered story into a graphic novel in 1990 called The Horn of Azoth. Filming took place in Mexico instead of Spain for the sequel, and they started shooting in October of '83, and the shoot ended in January of '84. Universal Pictures and Dino wanted to maximise profits for the sequel, and the best course of action for them was to try and reduce its rating to a PG and appeal to younger viewers and for it to be a family-friendly type movie. The fantasy genre was in full swing, and many movies that were in production and coming out were aimed at kids. Arnold expressed his concerns with the reduced violence. He felt they were going to alienate the fans, and this could cause problems for its success. In his biography, he said they weren't staying true to the character of Conan. Richard Fleischer was a talented director and had been working for over 40 years in the industry, and Arnold expressed his respect for Richard, but he knew he wouldn't try and argue his case to the studio, and expected Richard was just happy to be working and wasn't going to jeopardise his position. Richard retired from directing not long after making the film. The movie did get its PG rating, but only after being edited down from an R rating. This was before the introduction of the PG-13. Sarah Douglas later on said there was a love scene between her character and Conan that was cut out, but also many of the battles were trimmed. You still have quite a bit of blood and people being decapitated, and when you see the horn being torn off the monster at the end, it's pretty graphic. For the UK, it was given a 15 certificate, which I think was a fair rating. For the cast of the movie, we have Arnold Schwarzenegger returning as the legendary barbarian, Conan. Arnold put on an extra £10 for the role, but doesn't appear to be as big as he was in the first movie, but certainly looks more toned. Arnold took a $1 million fee to reprise the role. He enjoyed making the movie, but was eager to get away from the fantasy genre and focus on more contemporary movies, such as The Terminator. Sarah Douglas, who I'm sure many remember from Superman 2, playing the evil villain from Krypton, Ursa, plays Queen Taramis. The Queen believes strongly in the return of the dreaming god Dagoth and gives Conan his quest to retrieve the gem, but his reward is based on a lie. Conan is tricked into thinking she can resurrect his lost love, Valeria. Singer Grace Jones plays Zula, a skilled warrior who uses a staff to take out her enemies. Zula was originally a man from the Conan comics and created by writer Roy Thomas. Olivia Dabow, in her first film debut and was only 15 years old at the time of shooting, plays the Princess Jenna, who is destined to bring back the god Dagoth. Tracy Walter plays Malak, a skilled thief who tags along with Conan. He seems disinterested in getting involved in Queen Taramis' quest and comes across as a bit of a coward. Originally, David Lander was cast in the role, but he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, so Tracy Walter took on the part. Wilt Chamberlain, an ex-basketball player who was over 7 feet tall and unfortunately passed away in 1999, plays Bombata, the head of the Queen's Guard. He is tasked with guarding the princess and to keep a close eye on Conan to protect the young girl's virginity, so her sacrifice doesn't affect the prophecy. The late Mako is back as Akiro and is the only other returning character. He helps Conan deal with the other wizards they encounter along in their quest. Pat Roach, who sadly passed away in 2004, plays the evil wizard Toth Amon, who has the ability to transform into other forms, such as a giant bird and a hideous monster. Pat also returned in Red Sonja, playing a different character, and later popped up in the fantasy movie Willow. Arnold's old friend Sven Ulf Thorson is back playing a different character. He only makes a small appearance as one of the Knights of Taramis, and takes on Conan during a frenzied battle. And finally we have Andre the Giant, who wasn't credited in the movie, plays the twisted form of Dagoth. The movie opens with Conan praying to his god Crum, and he is joined with his new companion Malek. They suddenly get surrounded and attacked by a group of knights. Conan defeats them with ease. This was a test by Queen Taramis, who wanted to prove if Conan was capable for her mission. She tells Conan she has a quest for him, and if he completes it, he will be rewarded by the resurrection of his lost love, Valeria. Conan is reluctant at first, but agrees. For his quest, he has to escort the Queen's niece, Jenna, who is destined to restore the jewelled horn of the dreaming god Dagoth. First they have to steal a gem that is secured in a castle by a powerful wizard. Conan is not keen on magic, and it's his only weakness. To help him along his journey, he is joined by Malek and the captain of Taramis' guard, Bombata. Bombata has been given orders to kill Conan once the gem is in their hands. Shortly into their journey, Conan encounters his old friend Akiro, who Conan just randomly stumbles across as he's about to be eaten by cannibals. As they push forward to the castle, they encounter Zula, a powerful warrior who is being tortured by a bunch of villagers. Conan frees Zula at Jenna's request, and Conan accepts her wishes to join him on their quest. The adventurers travel to the castle of Toth Amon, where the gem is located. They decide to camp for the night, but they are unaware the wizard is watching them. He transforms into a giant bird, and in the dead of night kidnaps the princess. They awake in the morning to find her missing. She is currently being held captive in the castle. They head across the lake and enter the castle through a water gate and search the area. Conan spots the gem and gets locked in a room surrounded by mirrors. A cloaked figure appears and Conan is forced to battle the man-beast. Conan eventually figures out how to wound the beast by smashing the mirrors and throws his sword, impaling the wizard. Once Jenna takes the gem, the castle begins to disintegrate, forcing the group's hasty retreat. The gem reveals the location of the jewelled horn. They finally get to the ancient temple where the horn is being secured. In the crypt, Akiro spots engravings on the wall and discovers the ritual of bringing back Dagoth involves sacrificing Jenna. When I produced my review for the first movie, I did touch upon the sequel and praised its visual effects. The movie is pretty consistent with its visual trickery. For 1984, they have generally stood up well to scrutiny. Obviously there is the odd shot that looks of its time, but the miniatures and opticals were executed and processed well for the mid-80s. The starring piece is the foreground miniatures. They are used to expand the world and to show off the castles. It's crazy how these effects look so seamless. It's just a miniature up close to the camera and the actors are in the background. It's one of the best camera tricks that never looks dated. The opticals for the most part don't look faded or washed out. They do look a bit flat, like they've been cut out and pasted on the film. There was a strange choice of shooting the boat sequence as they crossed the river to the castle with blue screen. It's like on the day they didn't have a boat or felt it might be too risky to shoot and instead shot it in post. It does unfortunately look fake and does stand out as an odd choice to do as a visual effect. The animated effect of the wizard turning into the giant bird is nicely handled and executed. I felt in the back of my mind that it was a rubbish effect before I watched it again, but was pleasantly surprised. My initial response was like, hey, that looked kinda cool. The beast the wizard turned into was passable in its design. There isn't much facial movement and it appears very restrictive for the actor, but as a kid it scared the shit out of me, so I think it did its job. The twisted form of the god Dagoth is a very odd design. It looks like a rhino with wings. Andre the Giant is clearly struggling to move in it, and you don't actually see the statue transform into the monster. There are shots of the statue melting into this demonic form, but then it cuts to the full prosthetic suit. When you have someone in a very cumbersome costume, it's always tough to shoot around it and make it work. They do their best, but it's all very silly as you see Arnold do battle with a rubber suit. I appreciate the efforts and what they were trying to do, but it was all a bit too ambitious. Basil Poledouris returns to compose the sequel. Many regarded Basil's score to the 1982 movie as one of the finest film scores ever produced, and it opened many doors for him in the industry and brought him a lot of success. Basil was interviewed for the DVD release of the film. He felt the sequel would be an easy job, just bring over the themes from the original and adapt them to this new story. But after viewing the film, it was a lot different in tone and had new characters. The musical style had to shift to fit the fantasy and comedic elements. The main theme for Conan the Destroyer is slightly different from the original. and a bit more upbeat and heroic. It lacks the aggression of the original, however, and oftentimes it feels a bit hacked up and copied and pasted throughout some of the action scenes. The love theme, which was beautifully composed for the first movie, does make a short return when Conan sees his lost love under the Queen's spell, and a few themes are brought back here and there. But there is a lot of new material which I think works wonderfully for the film. It's always going to be tough for the composer to outdo himself with a sequel, and sadly Basil doesn't quite match the original in quality. No real fault of his own, because the sequel takes a different direction, and you have to write music that is appropriate, but it doesn't quite have the same impact and effect of his original material. The soundtrack did arrive on LP in 1984, and it was later transferred to CD in 1992. This version is available on iTunes, but only in the USA for some reason. I'm finding that a lot with soundtracks with their limited availability online. If record labels want to combat torrenting and illegal downloads, they need to make efforts to have this music available for everyone, and not just one country. If you want to own the original CD release, expect to pay a lot on the second-hand market, which I would avoid doing. In 2011 there was a new recording of the score by the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra. It was a complete release of the score, and included alternative cues of music as well, that were written but never used. It's a great presentation and worth hunting down. Conan the Destroyer has never been regarded as an underrated movie. I think at the time and over the years it's been rated fairly. Critically it was given a mixed reception. Some love the added fantasy elements and change of tone, but many who loved the original film and the core fanbase of the classic books of Conan were disappointed, and rightly so. The lack of violence, the themes of revenge and just that real world feel to it is sadly lost. Now there are certainly positive elements to the movie, which are pretty obvious from the get-go. The photography is absolutely stunning once the opening sequence starts. Jack Cardiff was one of the most influential cameramen of his time. He was one of the few who pioneered the use of Technicolor in the UK. He was a master of photography. Every shot is consistent and looks beautifully lit, but it doesn't have the scope of the 1982 film. It doesn't let you soak in the atmosphere and the locations. In the sequel, the world somehow feels smaller. The change of location from Spain to Mexico may be a result of that, but I think it was really down to the direction of Richard Fleischer. Fleischer was well respected at the time and had many movies under his belt, but I think it needed a director like John Milius, who was younger and had something new to bring to the table. It needed a director who was hungry for work and who was out to prove himself. Fleischer was probably an easy choice for Dino De Laurentiis. Richard, I'm guessing, was very efficient and would stick to the brief in keeping it family friendly. I have no real problem of them including more fantastical elements and throwing in wizards and monsters. It comes with the territory of dealing with sword and sorcery. It just further expands the threat to Conan. It's fun and exciting to have that be part of the series. The first movie did have its critics who felt the fantasy element was missing, so the writers have pushed more of what people knew from the Marvel comics. I think if you grew up with the comics of Conan from the 70s, then the sequel should feel quite faithful, despite the additional characters included don't feel entirely true to their comic roots. The movie I think has two big problems with its script, one being that it's not that engaging or really interesting, and there is no real major villain. Now with the script it doesn't really give you much plot. It's all front-loaded with Conan's quest and what he has to do. Then they go on their journey and conveniently bump into other characters that join him. There is little dialogue throughout, and most of it consists of the princess wondering if Conan would be her future king, and how to get his affections. It's just fluff and badly written. It feels like it's written to entertain kids, which is what the producers are trying to do in keeping it family friendly, but it's really lazily done in my opinion. This element is not suited for Conan and feels out of place. The supporting characters also don't have much to do. Zula, after her solid introduction, doesn't have much to do or say afterwards. She gets a few bits of dialogue here and there, but she feels like a fifth wheel, very much like Malek. They strive to include more characters, but fundamentally they don't contribute much to the story. It doesn't need all these characters tagging along. In the first movie, the supporting characters Valeria and Subotai felt integral to the story, and their friendship felt strong with Conan. They were a solid team. The sequel doesn't have that chemistry between the characters. I find it difficult to believe Conan would tag along with Malek. Malek is written to be disinterested in everything, and is pretty useless. The actor Tracy also looks pretty bored throughout, and looks a bit drunk during his scenes. The backstory to the god, who you could say is the main villain of the movie, and only pops up at the end in his deformed state. The god Daggoth is only spoken about briefly when Queen Taramis gives Conan his quest. Conan attempts to quiz the princess more about the jewelled horn, but the conversation goes nowhere and abruptly stops. Akiro finds out more about the prophecy on the walls, but it's information we already know, and as they attempt to flee with the horn, they bump into the keepers of the crypt, and they do discuss the god a tad more, but it's not enough to feel invested in his resurrection and how he will be a threat to Conan and the people of the world. You could argue, well, Sarah Douglas could be the villain of the piece, but it's shown she and her army are no match for Conan. She has magical powers, but she doesn't use them as a weapon, and she's off camera for a large chunk of the movie, so Conan has no real threat thrust upon him. He has challenges he faces, but gets out of them pretty easily. The original film, he is beaten down after being caught for killing the snake of Thulsa Doom. He is crucified and left for dead, and he does die, and is brought back to life to seek revenge. This is dramatic stuff and gets you invested in the story. The sequel has none of this. It's just a random adventure for Conan that has no real impact on your viewing experience. Now, I may sound like I dislike the movie. That is not entirely the case. It's a somewhat enjoyable experience. The visuals, the music, and generally well executed sword battles create this entertaining mix. I've always been a sucker for fantasy movies, and if they are competently made, then you've kind of won me over. But that doesn't mean I'm going to blindly praise it because I like the genre. I do have fond memories of seeing it as a kid, like I'm sure many did. When you're a child, you're just being wowed by the visuals and action. The story is never a huge concern. I remember being terrified of the monster Conan encounters in the Hall of Mirrors, but the battle is quite laughable. And the beast at the end seemed really cool, but now it's very clunky with its execution as mentioned earlier. But both these encounters use the same sound effect for the growl or say voice of the monsters. It's the same library sound effect you've heard in so many movies of the 80s. They sound like the beast at the end of Supergirl and the dogs in Ghostbusters. I think more time could have been spent to create an original sound effect instead of the regular sample of a lion roaring. It is a big shame that John Milius was unavailable to return for the sequel, and the studio's desperate attempt to appease younger viewers, thus alienating the adults who enjoyed the original. If they stuck to their guns and continued with the tone and adult nature of the first film, then maybe Arnold would have been eager to continue with the character, and we could have had a satisfying series. I always wanted to see Conan finally become king. It teases us at the end of both movies, but it never happened. If you haven't seen this movie, but love the original, I'm pretty certain you will be disappointed with the changes made. If you grew up on it and enjoyed it as a kid, then that nostalgic factor will tend to play a part in your continued enjoyment of it. The cast generally do a good job. Arnold is certainly in character and is in great shape. He is given more to say on camera to further display he can act to a decent level. He looks more confident within the role, and it's always cool seeing Arnold swing that sword around. Conan the Destroyer is a by-the-numbers sequel. It has its problems, which I think are generally easy to point out. It is, however, made by very experienced filmmakers, but it just lacks the passion behind the camera and in the source material, which was always common in the industry. It happens all the time, especially with sequels from the 80s. You always predicted the quality is going to drop off when a follow-up was in the works. The film is by no means a write-off though. There are redeeming qualities, but the movie demonstrated that Conan was already running out of steam, and sadly it appears we'll never get to see him finally become king.
The girl's destiny isn't only to deliver the horn.
It's just writing on the wall.
She is to be killed, sacrificed.
We shall see. Destiny or not.
They've gone.
Taking their horses.
Or been captured. Let's flee.
Wait. Barbada took her. Taramis planned it from the beginning. We get the horn, her guards will kill us, and Barbada takes the girl and the horn back to her.
And her promise to you?
A lie.
Where are we going?
To Shabisar,
What for?
to stop chain of sacrifice.
But it's her destiny. It can't be stopped.
Reserves to guard the palace.
There must be hundreds of them around it.
If you enjoyed the video, you can find more on my YouTube channel, and also you can follow me on Twitter. If you want to help support the channel, you can donate through Patreon and receive monthly perks such as updates on the latest news on my channel, early access to reviews and commentaries before they go live on YouTube. Even the smallest donation can help keep this channel going. Thank you.